Freedom Guard vehicles. Spider bike, weapon 230J Barrack railguns, propulsion Duff 540G low Piper engine. Spider bikes first appeared in the early days of the uprisings around the remote settlement of New Star Colony in Gilwatch in 2589. The bikes were constructed to take maximum advantage of the steep grades of Gilwatch's rough hill-rippled terrain. So successful were their relentless lightning raids that the Imperium, whose hover tanks were helpless to pursue the insurgents up the winding slopes, was forced to abandon Gilwatch for good 3 years later. Skirmish Tank, weapon twin arc launch missile launchers, propulsion Herveth 7-2 Rider. Eccentric tinkerer Ravor Herveth was originally a designer of agricultural machinery on Terran in the years before the Freedom Guard uprising. As the war expanded, Herveth was approached by his younger brother Jorn, a Freedom Guard officer, about the possibility of developing some kind of armored vehicle that could provide sufficient support for his troops that they could stand and fight against the Imperium's plasma tanks. Herveth agreed to try and put something together, using parts for some of his heavy-tracked land-clearing equipment. The result was the sturdy, versatile little skirmish tank, which Herveth outfitted with twin rotating missile launchers. Many skirmish tanks came to be affectionately referred to by their drivers as Hervies. Triple hover rail tank. Weapon 350J Barrack railguns. Propulsion Auran wave loader resistance engine. That's just a fancy word for a hover engine. While rumors had circulated for months in the halls of the Imperium Directorate that key schematics for a new style of hover vehicle had been intercepted by Freedom Guard infiltrators during the raid on Malak, Imperium commanders were nonetheless stunned when railgun-armed Freedom tanks using hover technology suddenly appeared skimming over the sulphurous sludge of the Werrell Marsh Lake on Tedan. The new triple-rail hover tanks easily wiped out a squad of plasma tanks that regularly guard the convoys of hover freighters ferrying fresh water over the marsh to the central launch site in Hobeth. Tank Hunter. Weapon Field Wall Spit Charger. Propulsion Duff C-50 Grinder. When first introduced, Imperium plasma tanks boasted such great weapon range and such heavy armor that they often went into action without infantry or air support. They seemed virtually invincible. It was a year before the Freedom Guard was able to counter, but when they did, the results were dramatic. It was during the Imperium's Rhenish counter-offensive that a column of plasma tanks on patrol in the narrow lanes of the haunted forests of Yapradii were suddenly overwhelmed in what one Imperium survivor of the encounter described as rolling sheets of lightning. What wiped out the armored column was in fact a new kind of Freedom Guard vehicle equipped with a short-range electrostatic weapon that crippled the Imperium's field absorption armor. These quick little scorpion-like monsters could be devastating in close combat, but their powerful weapon had extremely short range, and that was therefore most effective in confined areas. Skybike. Weapon twin Stip mini-missile launchers. Propulsion Airvork Streamjet. Ravor Herveth's skirmish tank was so lauded that the odd little inventor was asked to figure out a way to make a flying spider bike. Herveth's design was clean and elegant. The heavy wheels and spring axles were removed from the bike body, and strong, lightweight barite wings were added. Common streamjet engines, standard equipment on many recreational vehicles, were installed in the rear. The first models also carried railguns, but their firing mechanism caused so much in-flight instability that they had to be replaced with high-velocity Stip missiles. Outrider. Weapon Boar Dog missiles. Propulsion Airvork Skywinder. In addition to the darting sky bikes, the Freedom Guard Synod determined they would also need some heavier aircraft to help break up columns of Imperium armor at long range. At first they were skeptical of the plans presented to them by Fenton Dutchslin, whose design appeared unflight-worthy. A corps of brave volunteers was recruited to test pilot his odd fixed-winged flyers. Much to the Synod's surprise and relief, the new craft, although awkward-looking, performed acceptably and easily pummeled their practice targets. The young pilots who tested them bound themselves together in a kind of fraternity, dubbing themselves the Outriders, and the name soon came to be identified with the aircraft themselves. Many of these courageous young pilots were lost during the Freedom Guard's attempt to break the siege of Indra. For the remainder of the war, Freedom Guard infantry, hemmed in by the Imperium's armor, would regularly call in airstrikes, knowing that the Outrider cavalry would soon be on its way to rescue them. Hellstorm Artillery, weapon K900 range, Warden Howitzer. Propulsion Duff C-70 crawler. It became clear after the advent of the Tachyon tank that Imperium forces were best engaged at long range. During their successful attack on Koralbad, the Freedom Guard encountered the little-used Imperium Scarabs, mobile heavy artillery, and it occurred to them that it made perfect sense for them to develop this kind of long-range weaponry, for themselves. The result was the Hellstorm artillery, which fired a rifled fragmentation shell that had an extremely wide area of effect. The Hellstorms were vicious from great distance, but moved slowly and were very lightly armored, rendering them rather hapless targets at short range. Phase Tank, weapon Newell, heavy laser cannons. Propulsion Duff C-50 grinder, the ultimate tool for ambushing. Phase tanks were modified versions of the Freedom Guard's earliest armored vehicle model, the T-1 Reaper. Using the same phasing technology employed by raiders and Barden mercenaries, a group of them could completely nullify the range advantage of Tachyon tanks by popping up right next to them. Relatively inexpensive, the Freedom Guard ended up producing large quantities of these little barn-roofed tanks for much of the war. Rapid Armored Transport Weapon None Propulsion Duff All-Terrain Rider. The workhorse of the Freedom Guard infantry, rapid armored transports, more commonly referred to by their acronym RATS, could move over almost any surface, including water. Special navigation fins were added after the first production run. The RATS could carry up to 5 infantry units and use technology similar to that used by Freedom Guard scouts that allowed them to optically blend in with the surrounding terrain. Phase Runner, weapon non-propulsion, high EDN field inverter. The highest achievement in phasing technology, the phase transport came into being as part of the Freedom Guard strategy for breaking through the defenses of the Imperium's desiccator research facility on Koralbad. Hezekiah Smith, chief of development at the Freedom Guard's secret Ascension Labs, is credited with having found the way to enable a vehicle to shift the active radius of its phasing shield and therefore allow it to move through solid ground. Phase transports became extremely valuable tactical tools, but could never be used in large quantities because of the tremendous expense of building the generators that were necessary to project the transport's inversion field.